Go
That's
for
all
it.
right. So just to everybody who's watching, my name is Mana, and I'm a freelance oboist based in Northwest England. And I'm running this project for my ensemble, Magnard ensemble called Jibun, which means south in Japanese, which is my mother tongue. And I think, Sherry, you can speak a little bit of Japanese, is that right?
Hi, ちょっと少しだけです。よろしく。Just a little bit.
Really authentic. You must actually be fluent. You're just being nice. But I bet you're actually a really good linguist.
Not really. Well, I lived in Japan in the 1980s as a child, so I watched a lot of Doraemon, you know, the blue cat, and that's how I learned my Japanese.
Brilliant, brilliant. The best way. Um, so yeah, if you don't mind me telling me what how kind of you well what your life story is, who you are, and how music came into your life, and what you do now because of music.
Sure. I was born in Singapore, and I'm a child of the 1970s. Um, I was born kind of a child to a standard Chinese middle class family in Singapore, so music was sort of like a thought of as a nice middle class pursuit for good little girls. And actually, I was quite a good little girl as growing up as a child and even a good little teenager. I had my rebellious phase much later in life, even after university. So I didn't have any amazing story with regards to my first experiences of music. Um, but I guess my family traveled around a little bit due to my father's job. And also, I did a degree overseas in music in the UK. So that has informed my sense of self and also how I moved away from my initial delusions of grandeur, thinking I was going to be a concert pianist. Ha ha ha. Like never going to happen. And then started exploring ethnomusicology, developed a different kind of awareness as an other person in the UK, and specifically a Singaporean and a Chinese person. And then I've gone around several circles because I've worked in Singapore and Taiwan and China, and this has informed on different ways of being and how actually one can live separate, multiple identities in different times, and sometimes they overlap. Sorry, that's a very long answer, I realize.
No, no, brilliant, brilliant, really interesting. Um, just, I like to do this thing just in case there are people who can't see very well. I'm just going to quickly describe myself. I'm a Japanese female. I'm 35 years old, and I've got short black hair. And today I chose to wear my brightest red cable knit jumper. So if you don't mind, Sherry, just quickly describing what people can see.
Sure, great for accessibility. I am an Asian female. I'm in my 40s. I am wearing, probably can't see, some kind of top that has stripes in gold and gray. And I actually, you probably can't see, but this is an important thing. My hair is actually purple, and I began dyeing my hair about 5 years ago, and I realized that in London, it instantly buys you 30 cms of radial space on the tube. Like you're no longer invisible because you've got purple hair, and like people think, yeah, don't mess with her. Well, not so much that, then like she's not a model minority, so it buys me this extra space, proxemic space.
Brilliant. Maybe I need to try that. Brilliant. So yeah, so just quickly, because I ended up coming up with the idea for this project during the lockdown, and in fact, you have quite a big influence on this because I actually attended one of your online events during lockdown, and that's how I started thinking more about me as an East Asian musician, and also I met Tonia Ko, the
Mm,
composer who just the new piece. So actually, you're very, very important. You're a VIP in my life.
yeah.
But how was the like lockdown for you? How did you find the pandemic and how has it impacted you?
In many, many ways. So I don't know if people remember that at the beginning of COVID in early 2020, there were lots of discussions about, oh my God, this is a new virus from China, the Wuhan virus and so on and so forth. And there was a lot of anti-Asian sentiment floating around. And at the beginning of that, quite a number of friends of mine who identified as East Asian, whether or not they were Chinese, and Southeast Asian, whether or not they were Chinese or Chinese diasporic, felt this anti-Asian sentiment and felt that, now is the time to talk about it and understand a particular kind of racism in the UK that had not been discussed until relatively recently. A lot of people think racism in the UK is a white versus black issue, but actually there are many other kinds of racisms in the plural against yellow people, against brown people, and then also between yellow people and black people and brown people. It's very intersectional and hierarchical, and that sort of made me think about um, uh, living in the UK as an other person, with certain privileges, but also without a lot of privileges, and whether I was feeling safe. Um, and quite a number of friends, both people who were born in the UK as well as Singaporean friends and Chinese friends, were asking, why don't you go back to where, you feel safe and where you belong? And I belong in London. Why are you asking me this question? And I have friends who spent like 9 years and 6 months waiting for, to sit out their period of waiting to get ILR, indefinite leave to remain. And they made very painful decisions to return to Singapore, even, they were on the brink of receiving ILR, and properly, having the right to remain in the UK. And this made me think about where I wanted to be, who my people were, where I felt safe, where I felt included. And when I was thinking about all of this in June 2020, Black Lives Matter took off. And that's, I feel, very much related to the pandemic as well, because the pandemic exacerbates inequalities rather than acting as a level playing field. And that was when a lot of the things that I have been doing to think about combating anti-Asian hate, I co-convened some forums with a few friends at the University of Westminster and elsewhere, including the wonderful Diana Ye and Howie Ng. And we thought, you know what, maybe we should take a back seat, because the problem, the burning house, the house that's burning is not necessarily East Asians. We should give the platform over to Black persons and, practice some intersectional solidarity. And the pandemic went on for several years. And now, in the cold light of like a new recovery, I'm thinking about what it means again to be a resident of the UK, even though I'm temporarily here in Singapore doing field work, and wondering what has changed for people. Has anything changed under Black Lives Matter? Has anything changed? Have people, rethought the presence of East and Southeast Asians in the UK? Are there new terminologies? Is there new, different kind of awareness? And where has this reflected on where we choose to live? I'm very curious, Mana. I've always wanted to ask you, because you live in Cheshire, and I could not imagine myself living anywhere other than London, because in London, I feel everyone is from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the question you asked me about the pandemic, is one that, I'm still thinking about, and I'm still trying to think about where my people are. And by my people, I'm not referring to ethnicity. I find that my people are all others. So yeah, I'm curious about, your own parallel journeys. And I've heard some of this in the earlier talk, which was really, really interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, sorry,
well,
another
no, no, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I did my training, my professional training in London. So basically I'm from Japan. I grew up in Japan, but when I was 13, I actually came to Northwest England. I went to Manchester to the specialist music school there, Cheetham School of Music, which was like a world of its own, really, because kids only go there depending on their musical gift. So it was, as schools in England go, it was very mixed school, and in every way, in like kind of class or race,
Yeah.
ethnicity, like all sorts. So it was actually quite a nice place to be. And then I went to London to study for my degrees. I went to music colleges in London. So I was in London for about 9 years. And then we decided to move back up to Cheshire, my husband and I, because my husband is from Cheshire. And yeah, I do remember when I first moved, I thought, oh, I forgot that I would be a, a really a minority. Yeah. So, but it's actually changing a lot in the area I live as well. I now notice that it's becoming more diverse. And I do a lot of teaching work as well. So I do see kids that are from different backgrounds. And it's definitely changing somewhat, but it's compared to London, yeah, it's still very what you would call very typical England, I think. But yeah, I'm quite happy here. I don't regret moving, but I still go to London for work, and I feel the difference that in London
Mm.
I don't feel as what's that, sticking out like a sore thumb. I feel like I blend in a bit more in London.
And
Yeah. Yeah,
when
the thing about you said about you're looking for my people, that's really interesting because I start this project because I started thinking more about my ethnicity and my background. But then really the biggest part of my identity is being an oboist, being a musician. So this is why I wanted to do a project where it talks about people's identities in terms of ethnicity, but also music, which is such a big part of it all. So yeah, no, thank you so much. Can I ask you then
Sure.
something that I wanted to ask you? Um, because the video that I've already made with Tonya and Anna, the clarinetist, obviously you were supposed to be there, but obviously you were really unwell, so we had to replan. But this is really nice, so thank you so much. Having you all to myself.
Having you open myself. I mean, you know, speaking of spaces and places, if there was one thing that emerged from the pandemic is the normalization of virtual spaces. And I'm really glad that, you in Cheshire and now me out of London, but in Singapore, we're actually meeting in this non-space of an Instagram live chat. And I don't know where that is anymore. Is it like middle of nowhere or is it, in, yeah,
Yeah, that's
technologized world?
um, great. So yeah, I want to ask. So just quickly about my childhood. I grew up more immersed in Western culture than an average Japanese kid, even, I think, because I started training in musical theatre even before I started primary school or elementary school, we call it in Japan. And I started singing, and it's all Western music. I was doing ballet, and then I started playing the oboe, so started doing a lot more classical music. So I just think I took it for granted that that's just what the arts are. I didn't really think about um, why is why is it that everyone listens to Western style music or Western style arts, but we don't live there. How is it that's the mainstream? And I did grow up thinking, like, kind of subconsciously feeling that Western culture is superior almost. That's what you should aim for. That's kind of the goal. Whereas I never considered looking into Japanese traditional arts as such. How do you think, in your opinion, that happened? Like, why are we all very westernized, as it were?
I think it's such a big question, and a few scholars have attempted to answer or find ways of answering it. People like Mina Yang, who wrote Planet Beethoven, and Kofi Agawu, a theorist who writes about it from Black and African perspectives. So maybe my take is just some small person's boring take. I mean, to avoid being reductionist, well, no, to at the risk of being reductionist, I think a lot of it has got to do with colonization, missionization, and then actually cultural diplomacy, cultural capital, and maybe aesthetic capital as well. Um, I mean, if you look at where Western art music is thought of as the universal music or the official music or the supreme music, I mean, most of it is in territories that have been colonized at some point or another by European powers, or they have been in the receipt of missionizing campaigns via the church, or military campaigns and military bands arriving and so on and so forth. Um, but I think it's not just that. In territories that have not been colonized, I think the sheer idea of, Europe having once been a big power, has lent a particular kind of weight to Western art music as the music of the big powers, as it were. So maybe that has, been normalized into the psyche of colonial, post-colonial, neo-colonial states and territories. But at the same time, I mean, I think that there is great aesthetic value in Western art music, as alongside cultural capital. A lot of people think Western art. I mean, for people well, for example, the fast-growing region of China, Western art music signifies the attainment of a certain level of class status, for example. So I think it's a mixed bag of many things. And in my earlier days, perhaps I don't think I actually grew up thinking Western art music was superior. I just thought it was like the music that everyone did in school. So I never really questioned these things. You just sort of, why do we have to learn maths? Because maths is just maths. Um, and then later on, I did speak to some people who felt Western art music was superior. It was better than pop. Oh, it was better than EU Chinese music or like Indian or Malay music. In Singapore, there's a lot of multiculturalism is very, very politically engineered. But more and more, I'm thinking that for a lot of aspirationally cosmopolitan states, especially East Asia, Western art music is now a consumer product. It's not necessarily superior. It's just like a brand, like Prada, or like I get to consume it. Everyone gets to consume Prada. It's not like it's superior. It's just like a thing that I get to do because I have the resources to appreciate it, to understand it. Like, maybe these communities think of themselves as having arrived on the international platform, and they see themselves as having every right to enjoy, appreciate, and consume and pronounce on and develop and change and shape Western art music on their own terms. So I'm moving more and more towards this sort of thinking, alongside understanding the fact that there's a lot of neo-colonial thinking and people who still think that Western art music is the best music, as opposed to any other kind of music. I mean, my new thinking is sort of informed in my parallel experiences with cuisine. It's like in Singapore, if you step into Orchard Road, you can have Japanese food, you can have French food, Italian food, Singaporean food, Malay food. You can have Western food. You have Japanese Western food, or Japanese French food, which I think is amazing, as an interesting hybrid genre. And Western music is just one of many things you can enjoy. And I think it takes a different kind of cultural confidence in post-colonialhood to get to this point. But it's never straightforward. It's not like a blanket experience for everyone. But I think this is also related to, you know, globalization and the economic aspect of it, that allows us to think of Western music as an art, but also as a consumer product.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that I've had the upbringing I have because I love everything that I do, and obviously I everything that's happened in my life is pretty much thanks to being an oboist, really. I met my husband at the music school I went to, and things like that. All my friends, most of my friends I know through working and training in music, and and I still obviously love all the arts of, well, now of all forms, because I now start exploring more into things that I've been taking for granted. So the concert that I did put on as part of this project a couple of weeks ago, I invited a shamisen player to perform, which is a traditional Japanese instrument, and it was just incredible hearing that live. And yeah, so I just thought it is really odd if you think about it, how we seem to think music, if you say music, it tends to be Western style music. So yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it doesn't have a straight answer. But I do think that it does affect, it does affect kind of us as a musician being not Western looking. I don't know if you agree with
Mm,
that. I think then it comes into the territory of like authenticity, or um, who has the right to present the music. Everyone can consume it, but who has the right to actually distribute it, as it were, and do a good job of it. Because yeah, I think that's something bugs but buzz that bugs us most as actual musicians. Because I mean, I can't say for sure that I've I know that I've been overlooked for some opportunities growing up as a musician. I know that for a fact, but I don't know for a fact that it was because of my how I look and my ethnicity. Um, but it's really difficult. Like you say, you took a step back during the lockdown because of Black Lives Matter movement to not go with what your original plan, which obviously I totally respect and I think it was the right thing to do. Um, but I do feel like we are left out of that conversation quite a lot of the time. So yeah, I don't really know what we do about that. Obviously, for like in this country, for example, we got the amazing Kane Masons that is doing so much to represent black kids in this country that do music, and that they can do amazingly, and it doesn't matter that of the color of their skin. But we don't really have that equivalent for people that kids that look like us, I don't think. I mean, I don't know what can be done, but I guess we just have to shout about it a bit more, which is kind of the idea of this project. But yeah, what do you think about that kind of term, invisible minority? Like, do you experience that yourself?
definitely. So, I still get misrecognized as a student on campuses across the UK and Europe and the US. And come on, I'm in my 40s. I've got a double chin. I've got lots of wrinkles. I am an obasan. I look like an obasan, but somehow there's this idea that an Asian woman cannot be in a position of authority and has to be an eternal student. Um, and this has happened at conferences as well. People ask me, "Who's your PhD supervisor?" quite often, or like, "Are you doing your master's?" um, and I can so imagine this, being said of many other East Asians who work in any kind of circle, not just Western art music, but specific to Western art music. I think there are lots of issues with regards to the stereotypification of East Asians and Southeast Asian musicians. There's a project that I began with my research partner, Maiko Kawabata-san, Dr. Maiko Kawabata at Open University. And we looked at how East Asians have been invisibilized as robots, as emotionless, passionless, um, you know, technically perfect automatons who aren't able to like feel the real soul of music. I mean, these kinds of very, very racist projections on musicians, and I think this is something that is still whispered about in the corridors of conservatoires. Um, Whereas on the other hand, I also hear things like, "Oh my God, Lang Lang is so showy. He's just such a show off. Yu Jia Wang is, what is she doing? She's not wearing enough clothes." So I feel that there are kind of very weird double standards going on with regards to representation in the so-called big halls as opposed to in the the student rooms in conservatoires. And then there's also a different trope, and I think this is where different kinds of racisms are very interesting. This trope that I was talking to Ken Ueno at UC Berkeley, and and also a few other Asian American musicians who were talking about how um, there, there appears to be a lot of overrepresentation of East Asians in orchestras. because we're the model minority, we keep our head down, we practice really hard, and so on and so forth, as opposed to Black musicians in orchestras or brown musicians in orchestras. And I don't have the stats to show this, but I think representation is one thing, but representation does not necessarily equate with power. So, like I was saying, you know, the way East Asian musicians, maybe you do see a lot of them in conservatoires, like in terms of recruitment at conservatoires across United States and Europe, they form a huge part of the population of, students studying music. But how many of them actually get jobs is the next question. How many of them become superstars, or like the soloists that you see is another question. And how do they get branded or projected or unprojected is another question. Going back to this whole Black Lives Matter, intersectional solidarity, I think, the so-called stereotype of the kind of racism that a Black person may experiences, if you see this horrible racist stereotype is that if you see a Black person on one side of the street, you cross to the other side. But if you see an East Asian, you don't bother. You just walk into them and expect them to move out of your way. And I see this sort of analogy happening in the way, many scenes of professional music making. I see that sort of playing out. And I think there's more that we can do to move out of the model minority stereotype or the automaton stereotype, or more recently, the rich kid from China, the rich spoiled kid from China stereotype, which
Yeah.
is also really problematic.
Yeah, because I actually, as part when I was doing the research for this project, I read the quite recent report the Arts Council England has released about inclusion diversity in classical music, very specifically, and that in it it said you get lots of EC, East and Southeast Asian kids at playing at a very high level at school age, so like things like National Youth Orchestra, National Children's Orchestra, National Youth Choir, you do actually get lots of really good players and singers that join those organizations. But then you go to the conservatoire music college level, and then the numbers just drop because they just don't. I imagine it's because they don't see it as a viable career option. So they just think, I
Mhm.
love music, but I can't do it for a living. So they just not give up, but like they choose to do something else that they're good at, which I find, I mean, maybe that's fine, but I find it quite sad because I do feel like I'm one of very few people. I'd like more friends that look like me.
No, I
Um,
totally hear you. And I think it's very gendered, that if you, in certain East Asian cultures, maybe like they would expect the male in a family to take a safe job as opposed to a precarious artist's job. But I think things are also changing, as Diana Ye's book on No Longer Model Minority is showing. And yeah, there are new trends coming about as we all find new ways of expressing ourselves, and new inequalities are also coming. But you're right. I'd like more friends. And I'm so glad that, it seems in spite of the horrific effects of the pandemic, I felt that I suddenly discovered like people I could relate to. I was like, oh, were you around? Have you always been around? How come I never got to know you earlier? And I'm really glad I got to meet you,
yeah,
Mana.
me too. That's exactly what happened to me as well. So Anna, the clarinetist, who I chatted to, we've actually known each other a long, long time. Because she was at the Purcell School of Music in north of London, and I was at Jets, but we're similar age. And we were in National Youth Orchestra at the same time. We were at the Royal Academy of Music at the same time. But we knew of each other, but we never actually spent any time together or made the effort to spend time together. And I think it's partly because I felt like to be a classical musician, I've got to appear Western, which is awful. But I didn't even realize I was doing it. I think so. I just naturally, I mean, I love all my friends, regardless of where they've come from or what they look like. But I think I just subconsciously spent more time with my white friends, um, because that's what classical music looks like, I think. And it's just really sad that's happened. And yeah, it was only during the lockdown and also your online event, you and Michael's online event that actually opened my doors to um yeah, finding colleagues that I can relate to more, and have these conversations with, and then reconnected with um, people that I already knew who are very talented musicians and also of EC heritage. So it just means a lot, really. And as you say, although lots of awful things happened, actually that aspect has been such a positive um, thing in my life. So yeah. Just before we finish, I think you should go to bed soon. It's getting late for you. Are you a
I'm
night
very
owl?
I'm very excited and invigorated by your conversation. So
Oh,
yeah,
I feel like yeah, times across time zones, aren't we? So I'm
yeah.
quite I'm quite aware of that now. But I just wanted to finish off by saying, what do you think we can do to, I don't know, as a group and also as individuals, what can we do to kind of bring this community together more, or increase representation, or just make us feel better, really?
Ah, there are so many things we ought to be doing, and I think it's a matter of prioritization, and everyone will have a different set of, more urgent needs. I mean, I think in order for anything to really change, it has to be structural change. So we need to change policy, we need to change institutions at the very, very broad level, the way we work. But this is slow. This requires change from the top. Meanwhile, I think it's easier to see quicker results in change from the bottom. As to whether it's more sustainable, it's also quite tricky. I know that lots of small little COVID projects, reach out projects happened and people got excited. Then people also got burnt out very quickly. So I don't know, to be honest, but what I'm very grateful for is the ability to make community together and to be kind to each other. And maybe if things don't always have the kind of move at the kind of tempo we're hoping, it's all right. Maybe we can do small things with small numbers in a slow, long drip by drip way instead of trying to like, boom, I do this huge launch and everybody turns up and then they forget. And, I would rather do things in a slow, small, sustained way, even if it involves just 10 people. So I'm leaning more and more towards that, but I also see that um, the sort of 10 people accumulation has to happen in tandem with like broad structural change. We need the people who are in power to recognize that they hold the reins to change policy, to change the way people work, and that is the hard bit. Yeah, we
Mm,
need good allies as well
yeah.
as, you know,
I think that's also the one of the things that kind of I noticed and was brought up during lockdown was that actually there aren't that many East and Southeast Asians involved in the decision making of anything.
mm,
They don't get kind of the people at the top who are of similar heritage to us, and it makes it a lot harder to kind of get that change from the top happen, isn't it? Like you say, we need good allies, and it's a really difficult thing to find at the moment. But
yeah.
yeah, but like you say, I think I'm definitely enjoying talking to more people about their experiences and their thoughts, and I feel definitely more in touch with everyone, and also I feel like I'm getting to know myself a lot better. Um, so I do want to carry on doing this, and thank you so much for everything.
Oh, thank you for the talk. I feel that, things change me as well and change us. It's not just us asking for the change. So we are changed. We're part of the change, and hopefully it's, you know, taking positive steps towards, more equality for everyone. And I think, what you're doing is just fabulous and able to reach like different kinds of audiences that I don't normally always talk to. And yeah, and it's just nice to, to just be in a conversation with another fellow Asian woman who is a musician. Well, I'm a sometime musician, and to kind of like think I don't actually have to explain myself so much. Like you will
Mhm.
just get it because of
Yeah.
shared experiences. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, can I really quickly ask something else?
Right.
How is it, how are you feeling being in Asia back in Singapore?
Oh, you know what? It's like video game easy mode until you realize that there are different kinds of limitations. Yeah, I mean, maybe I was just born to be an outsider in many different lengths of cultures, whether it's not just a geographical or geocultural or ethnicity thing, but how we choose to live. And maybe that's uh, related to how we make friends and challenge ourselves and want to find new experiences and new curiosities. But it is weird. I have to say a lot of it is related to family ties. I mean, why I'm in Singapore to do research with on a migrant worker project. And actually one of my friends, Jenilyn, is here in the chat. Hi, Jenilyn, who's an activist from the Philippines. So I've also learned a lot. Before I leave, I think it's really, really important to also say that in the UK, I am a minority, but in Singapore, I am the majority. I'm a yellow woman with Chinese privilege. And, being in Singapore and bringing my UK experiences to Singapore has really taught me to, to, not center myself, to be more humble and to realize that I have the equivalent, the somewhat equivalent of white privilege when I'm in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, and to think about, how I could relate better and be a better ally to my friends who don't have Chinese privilege in Singapore. So everything is so intersectional. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, a lot to unpack in there. Oh, thank you so much. I feel like we need to have another chat sometime.
Definitely, and a coffee and
Yeah.
bento.
Yeah. Definitely with food. That's always best. Oh, thank you so, so much. And lovely to chat with you, finally.
Thank you. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I will definitely catch you up in the UK. And happy cold weather.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's nice and warm over there, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. Enjoy it while you can.
Take
Thank you
care.
so much.
Bye bye,
Bye,
Janet.
everyone. Janet.